Good evening and welcome to the Indiana University Cinema's virtual screening room. I am Jessica Davis-Tagg, the cinema's Events and Operations Director. Please note that tonight's event will feature live captioning. To turn on captions, move your mouse to the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, click on Live Transcript, then click Show Subtitles. If you have any issues accessing this feature, please feel free to ask a question using the Q&A box, which is also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. To begin tonight's program, IU Cinema wishes to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous communities native to this region and recognize that Indiana University is built upon Indigenous homelands and resources. We recognize the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We are dedicated to amplifying Indigenous voices and perspectives, improving community relationships, correcting the narrative, and making the Indiana University Bloomington campus a more supportive and inclusive place for Native and Indigenous students, faculty, and staff. We appreciate you joining us this evening for the Happy Birthday Josephine Baker conversation with Dr. Terri Francis and author Hanif Abdurraqib. We hope you've all had a chance to view some of Josephine Baker's films prior to this evening's conversation, which is presented in partnership with the Black Film Center Archive as part of the Starring Josephine Baker Film and Conversation series, curated by the center's director, Terri Francis. Dr. Francis also curated tonight's house music playlist. The format of tonight's program will be an extended conversation between our distinguished guests, and after about 45 minutes, we'll begin answering audience questions. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any time, which you can reach by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Dr. Francis is the author of Josephine Baker's cinematic Prism, which was published earlier this year by Indiana University Press. She is the Associate Professor of Cinema and Media Studies and Director of the Black Film Center Archive at Indiana University. Her work centers on innovators and adventurers in film during the early 20th and 21st centuries. Her publications in film history, Black camera, transition, feminist media histories, and film quarterly draw on archival research, cultural history, and visual analysis set within the vicissitudes of performance and representation. In addition to providing commentary for Salon and NPR, she has curated several film series at IU Cinema, including Race Swap, Black Sun, White Moon, and Love, I'm in Love, classic Black cinema of the 1970s. She has also hosted several Jorgensen guest filmmakers, including Julie Dash, Jatovia Terry, Stephanie Saintonge, and Cheryl Dunier. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Terri Francis.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jessica. Delighted to be here and to talk about a subject of some obsession, Josephine Baker, with someone who I think is similarly obsessed, Hanif Abdurraqib, who dedicated his most recent book, A Little Devil in America, to Ms. Baker. Hanif Abdurraqib is a poet, essayist, and music critic. Other than A Little Devil in America, he's also published They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, a love letter to, this is a different book called A Love Letter to A Tribe Called Quest, and that one is called Go Ahead in the Rain. I'm really excited to, I have the sense that I'm welcoming him into the Bloomington space. He's a Columbus-based poet, and I'm just excited to talk to a fellow Josephine Baker fan on her birthday. Hanif, are you there?
Hello, hello,
Hello.
hello. So good to see
Hey.
you again, Dr. Francis, and so good to be in the Bloomington space. I just read for the IU MFA department, so this is kind of my second time in maybe a month or so being in the Bloomington Zoom world, so it's an honor to be back.
Yeah, well, welcome back. That's I just had a class on Afro Surrealism, and that class was in some ways really animated by the folks from the MFA program, or
Yeah,
who had been in it a couple years ago, or who just the poets really come down for some Afro surrealism. It
They
was really
do.
great.
They do. They do.
Yeah, so I don't know. So happy Josephine Baker Day.
Yeah. Happy Josephine Baker Day. How did you
Yeah.
celebrate?
I having this conversation. Look, rewatching her movies. I lit my Josephine Baker candle.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that a friend sent to me in celebration of the book and stuff. And whenever I do a little Josephine thing, we light that to mark the moment.
I love that.
Yeah, and our girl has 2 days.
Yeah.
May 20th was Josephine Baker Day, which was initiated by I think the double NAACP.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Which like I feel like that's a great day, but I also feel like returning to someone on the date of their birth, um, kind of feels celebratory in a way, right? Where, of course, there's the days that kind of get aligned with like honoring history, which of course I'm all for. But I really do love. There's something I love about returning to someone on the exact date they entered the world, or around there, or thereabouts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we didn't know what was coming
Yeah, yeah,
out there in St. Louis. So she's a Midwest girl like us,
yes.
from St. Louis. And I love what you say about her in the book. Well, or this thing that she inspires you to say about how a country happens to you. Or is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah. Or a place is something that happens to you. A city, I mean, a country certainly, but um, even within that, like so much talk of Black folks, American Blackness is rooted in um, the history only in America, but also, America for Black folks is a series of happenings, and there was a whole life prior to America. And so I'm thinking, I always think about that as someone who was born here in a place I love, and all of the circumstances, unhappy and otherwise, that
Mm-hmm.
allowed that happening to occur.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't born here. I was born in Jamaica. And
Ah,
yeah, so I'm always, and I was an English major, so I'm always like paying attention to these. Well, for me, are places. I think for like the kind of U.S. based syllabus, these other places. So like stories like, I mean, Josephine Baker wasn't a literary subject of our classes, although kind of. But
kind of though. Yeah,
That Nella Larson novel,
yeah,
is it Quicksand?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's it.
Yeah, where there's a reference to her there. But just always being aware and kind of intrigued by people who are on the move, especially when they leave the US. That I think that's how she first intrigued me. How did she kind of come into your awareness?
I actually watched some of it again this morning, but I saw Siren of the Tropics when I was very young,
Mm-hmm.
and it was on. Looking back, this seems odd because it was on television, not like basic television. I mean, it was on like I think I was at a friend's house. It was on one of those classic movie channels back in the day.
Oh, sure.
I guess those channels still exist, but um, and I saw Siren of the Tropics, and that was her first big film.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in retrospect, I remember thinking nothing of it really, except for being eager to find out who it was that I was watching. Right? I was at an age where I was, I mean, I'm still at an age where I'm curious, but I think I was at an age where if someone captivated me, I became instantly obsessed with them.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've gotten older, I think my interest in Josephine Baker has changed because I'm so invested in her later career and later life. Just like so much, I don't want to say so much more interesting. I don't want to kind of do a binary thing, but for me, I'm so much more invested in it.
Oh, interesting.
I'm so much more captivated by her late career performances, her late career living,
Mm-hmm.
um, the kind of trouble she pursued activism wise, and kind
Yeah.
of that she relished in pursuing. Um, those
'Cause
things are
I was
fascinating.
actually going to ask you, like, when you think of Josephine Baker, is it Baker the performer or Baker the person? Like, which Baker is it? But this way that you said her living and her performance, I think, kind of suggests something.
Yes, though I am also fascinated by her as a performer. I think I maybe talked about this last time we talked, Dr. Francis, but I'm fascinated by, like, to me, she's an athlete, and I wish that more folks
Yeah.
talked about her as her athleticism. Um,
Yeah.
Not that that's all she was. Obviously, she was captivating on stage in a great many ways, but I'm in old clips of hers. I'm so fascinated by just the strength and power with which she
Hmm.
moved and leapt, and I mean, there's
Yeah.
like real intense athleticism in her presence.
Yeah, when you said that for folks who are just joining us, maybe people are following us from one conversation to the next, who knows? But folks will remember last time, I'm not sure when that was, maybe April, maybe or March. We talked in a Wexner Zoom, thanks to the lovely Dave Philippi. And when you talked about her athleticism, that was the first time I had heard that, I think, like that precise formulation of just thinking about her body in that way. I don't know, because there is like a I don't know, I it's this might seem strange, but it does seem sometimes that that people are uncomfortable talking about Josephine Baker's body, even
Mm-hmm.
though that's what we
Which,
have.
I mean, part of me would rather that than people be too comfortable talking about it.
Well,
um,
you know what? Yes.
because I think that there's like maybe some folks who can do. I mean, I actually, I mean, the first cover for Little Devil in America, I pulled back from because, which was Josephine Baker, and I pulled
Oh
back
yeah,
from it
let's.
because of what it might signal to
Yeah.
people to use her body in that way. But I love that photo so much.
Oh yeah, you know what? Let's look at that. Seth, I think that is number 5. Nope, number 4.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. A Little Devil in America. So like, yeah, I see what you're saying. I love this because it lets us see that musculature in her arms
Yeah.
and legs, which we sometimes don't get to appreciate. And I think we do think, I mean, I guess we know that not anybody can just leap around like that. But on the other hand, putting it in the terms of athleticism for me connotes a power and strength that is different. I don't know. It just adds something that I think is typically not there in talking about her performance.
Yeah, and I mean, some of that is because I think people don't always talk about dancers and that as athletes, don't often talk about women performers as athletes. Um, and because Josephine Baker was a great many other things on stage too.
Sure.
Um, but watching her old performances, the ones where she was a lot more mobile, there's just a real grace and power that to me is immensely athletic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just
Yeah.
effort, and it looks effortless. I think that's the thing for me, is that um not to say that she wasn't working hard, but she made it look really effortless.
Yeah. You know what? Let's look at this. I grabbed a bunch of moments from her this leap that she takes within Princess Tam Tam.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. Well, we could look at the second one, Seth, which is in which so I don't know if people remember the story a little bit. Baker, there she goes. So everyone's like upset because she's supposed to be the princess of, I don't know, some country that they made up. I'm not even going to dignify the nonsense by remembering it correctly. But
Yeah.
Baker is playing someone who's playing someone else in this fantasy that this like writer's block hack writer is dealing with by just by playing with her, like, pretending to like her. And then in the story, they pretend to take her to Europe, and her cover as the sophisticated princess is blown when she takes this. Well, she rips off her dress, the
Right.
veneer of her sophistication, this gold or silver lame dress, I imagine it was probably gold though. And then she has this black frock underneath, and she takes this leap. You know what? I actually need to live that again. Can we, Seth? Can you show us the leap one? Because I was Henny. The one thing that I was thinking about when in doing these is something you said about your book, where you wanted to talk about black performance outside of white appropriation.
Right, yeah.
Right. And this film, it's all
Oh, it's like a dream exhibit of what like,
it really is. And it was just like, well, how do we just see Josephine? I was like, oh, well, we can just edit them out. Like, just
yeah,
delete them. So I made this loop of her leaping, um, to just be able to, I don't know, just see it. And in a way, I kind of want to pause it for a second, because it's it's like that whole preparation, and then the arms are out, and when she lands she immediately starts
yeah.
dancing, and then
That's
you
the thing. The
yeah,
landing, I think the landing is the coolest part of this clip because she lands into a move almost, right? Which
yes,
again, I mean, not to like do that, not to take the Josephine Baker as athlete bit to the furthest possible extreme, but that's, I mean, that's balance. That's like, really hard stuff she's pulling off. And I will say too, Princess Tam Tam is maybe my favorite. I don't know, but it's the one that's the most interesting to me because I think there's a metaphor here about how there are many Josephine Bakers, right? And in that movie, that kind of impulse comes to life where she is many, she is many people, even though it's through this kind of like odd fantasy that I don't really want to dwell in. But it reminds me of this idea that there's like many Black performers throughout not just Josephine Baker's era, but before and after. Um, there are many versions of her kind of wrapped up into the version that people saw most prominently.
yeah, that's it. That's what I was trying to get at with this cinematic prism idea, that there's when you're looking at one, there you're looking at aspects of others, her other images and personas, and characters, that are within her. um I'm trying, what is the one that lets us see the dance move? Is that the second one?
Yeah,
Yeah, she's ready. They can't take it. They can't handle it.
that's so great. That's so great.
Yeah, yeah. Like last week I was kind of into this mid-air moment, just because I don't think I had, I don't know, how, like you see it, but see, I saw it, but I didn't fully feel it, or I felt it differently, I guess, having talked about her so much in the last couple of months. But you're right, like the way that she just pops back up and is ready for the, or not even pops back up, but steps on beat into the next move is amazing.
There are a lot, and there's a lot of moments. I mean, not just on stage moments. There's a lot of moments like that where she ascends and then descends into the next movement,
Mm-hmm.
um, which again is just really difficult. I think that to appreciate Josephine Baker, the performer, to me, is to really sit with the degree of difficulty that she's of some of these performances. Now, I know I just said that I was very fascinated by her late career. That's a whole other thing because, in some ways, when you look at those performances of her in her later life, she wasn't that old, right? But she had really learned, she couldn't move as well, obviously. Um, but she had really learned how to captivate and control an audience through stillness, even, which is so incredible to me, where um, like all great performers, she had adapted to what her body was capable of. But she was so, there's that great performance of her in Paris. I want to say like the 70s, maybe early 70s, where she's got like the giant blue feathers on and all this. And she's not really moving a whole lot,
That's
you know,
right.
but the crowd is still she's still getting the crowd to do exactly what she needs them to do.
Oh, that's
And to
right.
me,
Yeah.
that is fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen that. She's in like a sparkling turquoise blue, maybe it's a
Yeah.
jumpsuit, like a
Yeah. Yeah.
body,
Yeah.
and then she has like the feathers, and
The
she
feathers
just
top of
sort
her head.
of,
Yeah.
just, I love it. Yeah, Josephine Baker. While I was writing the book, I did not love her this much. I think the process of figuring out what I was doing kind of took the, I don't know, I wasn't always able, not even, not always, I don't think I was that connected, but now on this side of it, it's super fun. I love her so much.
Is it hard, do you think, though, to, if you're as immersed in a subject as you were with working on the book? I mean, it's probably difficult to love, right? Because you have to analyze, you have to dissect, and I think
That's
through
right.
that dissection, what you're experiencing now is where that love comes through, I would imagine. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think about this in the process of working on things when you're kind of pulling someone apart. For me, you're doing the work of cultivating a love that will come later. But in the moment, it's kind of like, a different thing.
Yeah, yeah. Because that is people, like, I remember moments where people would say to me, "Oh, you do something just to be better." I'd be like, mm. Because like taking her apart was actually taking me apart.
Right, right,
It's just, I'd never written a book before. It's like, ooh, how do you remember everything over all the different parts, or make it, organize it, but then also, yeah, like analyzing her, taking the necessary distance from the topic, which I guess I did for a few different reasons, like as my perceptions of her changed over time. I think I was always intrigued, but I think there was a part of me that was a little bit like, I don't know.
yeah,
Why doesn't she
yeah.
have any clothes on? Put some clothes on. Don't let these white people make you look crazy out there.
And that's the thing, right? Is that it's so much of my interest around Josephine Baker. There is that kind of underlying, um, I don't know. I think my impulse sometimes was to want to care for her in that way, but I also ran into the wall of like, does that strip her of her autonomy, right?
Right.
But my impulse was like, these largely white audiences, largely white directors and showmakers and stage builders and whatnot, and seeing stuff like her in the banana skirt in this vague quote unquote African setting. I mean, that was like, in some ways, that's like alarming to me.
Yeah.
Um, in my instant impulse is, well, that's not right. How could she let these people do that to her? But I think that it was really useful for me to consider Josephine Baker as a fully autonomous being, for better or worse, right?
Yeah.
Like I think there are some worse involved with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to grant her that autonomy and to imagine that maybe she would make different choices now, or maybe not.
Or maybe not.
Yeah,
And also, dancing is fun. Bananas
dancing
were
is very
fun.
fun.
And that there was, I mean, there were like maybe two frameworks that helped me out with thinking about the early Baker, and one of them was thinking even earlier than her Paris dancing, and I looked in the Black press to see what folks thought about her, and in her performing in the U.S., and I was surprised and a little relieved to see how much people admired her, like when she was doing vaudeville and
Oh yeah,
stuff, and that they really seemed to admire her as a comedy dancer, and and although of course they didn't have photographs of her on stage or anything like that, it was, just kind of verbal descriptions. It struck me that she knew what she was doing, and I think, as happens to us in various kinds of contexts of Black performance, you're doing what you're doing, and the
right.
context is framing you in, in ways that you're not entirely in control of. So I started to sort of get that, and then I got a sense of her as someone who practiced, who studied, like the popular discourse on her was just like, oh, she's just being like primitive Black. Oh my God,
Right,
what a
right.
revelation. But meanwhile, she's like practicing and studying what other people are doing and kind of taking their moves and incorporating them into what she brought to Paris. So I sort of reframed her as someone who was a researched professional who was early in her career and who arrived in Paris with a repertoire, with a practice, and the practice that was then reframed, conscripted in some ways, restaged into this like into the music hall, which was just full of all kinds of, I don't know, just like raunchy, colonialist kind of fantasy
Right.
context. And her body in particular, I think, allows this like the colonialist fantasy to really go on. Um, and yeah, and I think it just kind of it goes from there. And sometimes I think about, I don't know, this is probably, as they say, reading into it, but I think about that scenario of the banana dance is really similar to Princess Tam Tam in that her character is the figment of someone else's imagination. And I kind of make a lot of the, maybe I'm making too much of it, but these moments where she's framed and we don't see the fantasizer, the
Right. Right.
plantation guy. And so I just kind of like, well, his perspective is not the framework. It's not the only framework of this, this little video or this film that's been made into a video or whatever, and that gives some space, maybe.
Yeah, I also though I thought about this a lot when thinking about her work with the French Resistance, about how Josephine Baker's ability to live in the imagination of particularly men
Mm-hmm.
was a tool of power,
Mm.
right? It's how she was, in some ways at least, it's how she was able to work as a spy. You
Oh,
know,
right. Mm-hmm.
it's how she was able to kind of maneuver that world and cross through borders and carry information,
Oh,
because
that's
she's
right.
so intensely yes, like, I know the old adage is that sex is power, but I think even more than that, more than sex, the desire, right? If you can build up desire in someone else's imagination, that's where the power is in some
Mm.
ways. And I think that Josephine Baker, I mean, again, all of this I think is under the for better or worse caveat, but there's a way that, because she was so often framed as almost so otherworldly that she could only live in the imagination, that
Mm-hmm.
allowed for a real power that she wielded throughout, if not in her early career, particularly in the middle. She really wielded that, and in her life, like her actual life.
Yeah. Oh, that's such an interesting way to think about that. Yeah, that she's so that rather than only thinking of her as somebody who is being projected upon, that she is also deflecting, reflecting,
Right.
and that's a power, and she can move through that. Yeah. No, that's yeah. I like that. I like that way of thinking about
It's
her.
easy to, like, what some might call now code switching, but she was doing that on grand scales all throughout. But
Sure.
it's the thing about living largely in the imagination of folks is that you can convince them you're anything. You know what I mean? And so uh she seemed to use that to her advantage from time to time.
Yeah, she certainly did. She's a reader, and she's also a spectator
Right.
of her own performance and kind of knows what's going on. Um, I want to play you a little bit of Josephine Baker talking about Josephine Baker.
I would love that.
Yeah, it's I think Seth, I think that is number 5, like starting at around 2 minutes and 12 seconds. I think.
It's nice to have you here.
Thank you very much.
I mentioned before you came out that a lot of young Americans had never seen you before, but you created a sensation in Paris in the 1920s, was it
Yes,
not?
1925.
1925.
Yes, many years ago, huh?
Yeah.
But of course, I never count. It's always more convenient to not count.
Now, you're known when you appeared. Is that what created the sensation? Because of you changed and these magnificent
Oh, Mr.
clothes all the time?
No,
that you
not
wore?
at all, Mr. Carson. Those were the moments of the bananas. Have you ever heard about them?
Yes, you came down from this.
Yes, in, how do you call it, Easter egg. And I was supposed to be the bunny rabbit, and I only had a few bananas here and there.
Bananes, mesdames, des bananes, des bananes. C'est vrai, j'ai apporté ça parce que c'était devenu la mode, vous savez, les bananes après ça.
C'est devenu la mode après.
Ah oui, il y a justement des gens qui disaient des bananes. Comment c'est possible d'avoir une robe de banane? C'était pas tout à fait une robe, mais enfin, je m'arrangeais comme je... Bah, qu'est-ce que vous voulez? Non, du travail.
Ah, c'est
Et alors ça,
vous parliez
moi,
maintenant.
oui, parce que vous savez, il faut beaucoup travailler. Oh, ben, c'est pas difficile, j'ai toujours aimé travailler. Même en étant toute petite, j'ai travaillé chez nous et j'étais habituée. Alors, je trouvais quand même que dans mon métier de théâtre, il fallait travailler des heures et des heures. Ou le chant, la danse, ou jouer la comédie, ou n'importe. Il fallait beaucoup travailler. Et c'est ce que j'ai toujours fait. Et je crois que ça m'a apporté bonheur parce que je suis encore là. De temps à autre, je peux faire quelque chose. C'est ça. Moi aussi, quand j'étais jeune, j'étais adoptée. N'est-ce pas, tout d'un coup, je suis devenue vedette, si on peut le dire.
Ah, on peut le dire.
Bah, je sais pas, mais enfin, si on peut le
Tout
dire.
le monde le sait, sauf
Bah,
vous.
j'en sais rien, ça. Ça m'a toujours gêné, ce mot vedette. J'ai jamais aimé ça. Parce que j'ai jamais voulu me croire. J'ai jamais voulu croire que j'étais une personnage importante. J'avais peur qu'un jour, si ça n'arriverait plus, et que je n'avais plus de public qui m'applaudissait, j'aurais souffert. Peut-être c'est un peu lâche de ma part, mais j'avais voulu rester, je dis pas simple parce que ça a l'air d'être prétentieux, mais de ne pas écouter, ne pas voir sans regarder, regarder sans voir, d'entendre et d'écouter sans entendre. Vous savez, ce genre de choses qui pouvaient peut-être un jour me réserver, je suis assez contente parce que aujourd'hui je suis tranquille avec moi-même. J'ai la paix et je ne regrette pas le théâtre.
Wow. There's one thing I really love about her later career is how she was so thoughtful. Artists, I'm generally not that interested in artists talking about themselves. Like the artist on the artist does not really compel me unless we're talking like in a reflective sense. And Josephine Baker was so thoughtful about her body of work as she aged away from it, or aged away from parts of it.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's why I'm so captivated by her later life and career.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's a performer who learned some lessons, good and bad, and was kind of unafraid to talk thoughtfully about that process of lesson learning.
Yeah, yeah. You scared me for a minute. I was like, oh no, you don't like performers talking about themselves. Oh no, I picked the wrong clip.
No, I think I love thoughtful reflections, you know, like
yeah. And she's she's poetic, I think.
Absolutely.
This section. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the reason I love her speech at the March on Washington so much is because it's not very long and it contains so many emotions. It's funny, it's full of rage, it's self-aware, it's kind of mournful and melancholy. And that speech is that, I mean, I don't know, I haven't clocked it, but that speech can't be more than 5 minutes long. Or barely over 5 minutes. And I really admire that about her.
Mm-hmm.
She's not, there are a great many artists who have aged into a type of renewed wisdom about themselves.
Yeah.
But not all of them are as self-aware, I think, as Josephine Baker was.
Yeah, and I love hearing her embrace her younger self.
Right.
She has a sense of humor about it, the costumes. The first interview comes from a conversation with Johnny Carson on the Johnny Carson show. Then the other one was from Canadian television. And there, in both instances, when she, well, even in the Johnny Carson one, she kind of mixes up two of her performances. There's another one where she is an Easter egg and she floats over the stage and eventually descends, and she kind of mixes that up with the bananas, which I like that. And then but then just kind of embracing who she was, and I like hearing her talk about hard work, going back to what your point earlier
Yeah.
about athleticism and the importance of her intention, her practice, her seriousness about what she's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that one thing that I really love about Josephine Baker and always have is that she doesn't seem to, and I can't speak as an authority, but it does seem like she has a really good relationship with the feeling of shame and not really feeling shame for her, at a time when like many people would have her feel shame or want her to feel shame.
Right.
Um, like even when she was older, I think, um, you have people still wanting her kind of like answer for her the past career romances or whatever. And she was so generous to herself.
Mm-hmm.
Not just, we talk about her artistry all we want, but I think as a blueprint for myself as a person, to extend that level of, to be both that self-aware and extend that level of generosity to oneself is a really fascinating combination. Because for me, I think self-awareness sometimes comes with just like a side of ongoing guilt. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
To be too aware of oneself means you're kind of like wading in the waters of all the stuff you maybe should feel bad about. But the tapping into the generosity in her retrospective glances at herself is really motivating.
Many questions came up in my mind, but I will not ask them. Um, but there is. What I find myself working against in my mind is, I spent all this time thinking about her work, and there is something, you take on the responsibility of talking about a person's life work, and so there's something, like, I know early on I was trying to distinguish between talking about Baker the person, like I wasn't going to write a biography as instructed by my dissertation committee, but it would be about the figure of Baker, and it would be something analytical and theoretical, and historical about her persona, the histories that her performance that are contained or maybe not so contained in her performances. But at some point, there was a sense of, the sense of like, wow, this woman is doing all of this work and taking so many risks. Like, it's like I took it for granted. Yeah, of course,
Right.
yes, she went to Paris and then she was and she was in these movies, and as
Yeah.
one does. And then it was like, no, as one does, as in singular, her.
Singular. As one person has done. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so strange how it took me a while to get there, but then but now there is, I do occasionally receive on her behalf people who are who want her to feel ashamed and who are really concerned about the image that she's putting out there, and how to take her, how to embrace her totality and stuff. It's kind of interesting.
It is.
But
I do think though, historically, obviously I don't need to, I don't know if mansplain is a word, but even do any kind of adjacent of how it's explaining of how what things have been forced upon or put upon Black women throughout history. But I do think that's just a function of it too, though, is that like shame about image and about presentation. That's a burden that I think Black women have to carry more often. Historically, they've had to carry more often, and that those assertions often are not coming from folks who are not Black women. And so I think Josephine Baker faced a lot of that as well. And
sometimes they are.
I think about Zora Neale Hurston too, right? Like someone who was shamed by men in her community about these same kind of, I mean, what we're really talking about is respectability, right? It's like
Yeah.
these modes of respectability that others were projecting on them.
Right. Sometimes the aunties
Yes,
and the grandmas, they be policing
absolutely.
that harsh, really,
Absolutely.
really
They might
harsh.
be harsh. Sometimes they're harsher than the dudes, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But I
Yeah.
like at some point I don't know how or why. Maybe I don't know. Just I don't know, when you write about somebody, I just gained such a respect for her into walking into these spaces of risk. Like what does it mean to decide to be an artist and a performer in the 1920s?
Right.
Like what choice was she making, or did she understand herself to be making? And I'm just amazed by that. Like the decision to be visible, like to be shamelessly visible, during a time of, of real risk. It just seemed, I don't know, that just like at some point it just like clicked for me that there was something so bold and exciting in that decision. And then this decision to go to France, and be shamelessly visible there,
Yeah.
in her own way, and that she always seemed like she held that, like that she was just always really into it. But I want to also ask you about her singing voice. I don't know if you spent any
Oh
time with her.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love her singing voice. I'm glad you went there because I feel like, and so I talk about, you know what, I never get asked about this or talk about this, and a lot of people I don't think talk about this, but uh, she was such a haunting singer, you know.
Yes.
Um, some of this too, I always talked about, when we talk about these singers from this era being haunting, some of that is because the original recordings just have a haunt to them.
Sure.
But if you listen to like even like remastered stuff, her voice carries a lot of sorrow,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is interesting because so many of her performances as we know them, we see her smiling, or at least on some level of ecstasy, approaching some level of ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that does not always translate to like what her voice was holding. And
Mm.
that I think interests me and has always interested me. Because she wasn't like a singer. Like she wasn't even the singers like blues singers. She wasn't Billie Holiday or Bessie Smith, but she could carry a tune in a very unique way. I actually think that if Josephine Baker were operating in a different era, her singing voice would be appreciated a lot more than it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I think it was so unique and there's such a singular weight to it
Yeah.
that I think she would have, well, I think she would also have to be willing to be recorded more widely, because that's another thing with her is
Yeah.
that, so much of her vocal performances were built into her stage act, but like, I often wish they would put her in the studio and do a run of like 20 albums, that kind of thing. Because I think she had that ability.
Yeah. So are you thinking about her later voice, like her
Yeah.
50s? Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that sound.
And that's, I mean, granted, her early voice also great, but I think that's when you get so many singers who settle into their voice early, and then when their voice changes as they age a bit, some of the magic gets lost, or they can't figure out how to,
Yeah.
translate to the just natural process of voice aging. But Josephine Baker, I think, had this kind of reverse effect where in her earlier days, she was talented, but you kind of feel like she was trying to like, drive a car she didn't really know how to drive. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
she
that's
gotta,
well said. I think she's trying to fit a type. She's trying
yeah,
to be something in between a French. Well, she's trying to be Ethel Waters. I think
right,
she's trying to,
right,
and she's trying to be sort of a concert singer. She's trying to perform in these films and be glamorous. So she's like sitting. It's like, so she'll have these moments in the films where she's doing the stage Baker of the dancing, but then she's also trying to transition to this other more glamorous, sophisticated, international, somewhat American, but also somewhat French chanteuse type of performance. But I think the gravitas of an Edith Piaf, I think, actually comes into her voice much later.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. My hope for a lot of singers is that they do what Josephine Baker did. And I mean, there's other examples with singers who have kind of aged into the changing of their voices and made a new kind of magic out of that changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, right on. Yeah, we were playing a little bit of it, a little bit of her music before we came on. Um, I'm just trying to think. There's the what is on there? The La Vie en Rose might be on there. She
Yeah.
did that Bob Dylan cover. What is that? Come poets, come
Oh,
critics.
she did Times Are Changing.
Yeah, I was trying to
Yeah.
stop myself from saying a change is going to come. Like, no,
That was I get those, and I don't get those two mixed up, but like when I hear the lyrics, I'm like, change is gonna come.
right.
I think that probably speaks more to my relationship with Bob Dylan, which is shaky at best.
Same.
So all
Honestly.
respect to him. Glad he's still with us.
Yeah, glad he's still with it. Yeah, and I mean, I've only heard the recording that's, I don't know, floats around on YouTube of her, this Carnegie Hall concert that she gave. But I just love that sound of her voice. There's a vulnerability to it. There's an insistence in it. There's a clarity. I just cannot get enough of it. I just really, it's smoky, grounded, kind of quartz, like, I don't know. It's very
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah. It's lovely.
Very into it. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll listen to a little bit of it before we take any questions. I wonder, should we see what people are wondering about in the audience? I don't know. It could be just us, actually. I don't really know.
It
Who's
is
out there?
not just you. We are getting great questions. For those of you out there, there's still time to submit a question or multiple questions. You can do so by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and typing your question or questions into the Q&A box. But I am demanding privilege, and I am going to ask the first question.
Oh.
I am really interested in hearing you expand a bit on Josephine Baker's training. I know she was trained as a singer and even sang in an opera. But what about her training in singing, acting, and dancing? And then where did it fall in her career?
The late 1920s, just before she performs in Siren of the Tropics, and then it continues into 28, 29. And that the goal, it's some of it is what I was referring to just a minute ago when Hanif and I were talking about her different voices. So like she did have an ambition to be a singer, initially a blues singer, but that she did not have that in her. And in the Paris context, her manager got her some, like, a vocal coach and a dance coach, and a French tutor. This is the period where she starts to learn to speak French and understand what is going on around her, and so it's all of a piece. And her feature films, Zuzu, maybe more Princess Tam Tam. Princess Tam Tam portrays this process of transformation, where there's like that little sequence right before Alwina, well, the fiction, the fantasized Alwina of the certainly also fantasized Alwina. Before she goes, there's that you see her playing the piano, and people are filing her nails, and she's trying on different shoes and stuff like that. She kind of depicted that process of, well, I guess I'm sure that they were thinking of it as civilizing her.
So someone has asked, what do you think it was about France that Baker gravitated towards amongst all Europe? Why not England? Why not Italy? Why France?
Yeah, well, I mean, she was invited to go there specifically. To perform in a show, The Black Review of 1925. And as she says, there's a video, I always say, I mean, obviously it was not a video in 1950, but a video of a filmed interview that she did in the 50s where someone asked her that question and she says, well, Paris is the city of art. And I wanted to, if you wanted to make something of yourself, that's where you went. So.
And there was also just like there was also just like she could get work consistently there, in part because of the influence of Black soldiers who kind of infused jazz into Paris during World War One. There was an opportunity for her to get continued work.
Yep.
Laura has asked, Josephine Baker sometimes appears as a character in contemporary TV shows and movies that are set in 1930s Paris. She seems to be used as a synecdoche as for the glamour of the period in that particular area. Do either of you have any thoughts about these appropriations of Baker's persona?
Hanif, do you have that?
Yeah, I don't love him personally, but I also think that the reason I don't love them is because I think they strip her of a wholeness, right? Because I love this question because I do think Josephine Baker is so often associated with glamour, but she also endured a lot to get to do the work that she did and to get to appear glamorous. And as we talked about, even when she was at the height of her work, she was mostly only glamorous in the imagination of others, or presented as glamorous in the imagination of others. And so I they often feel a bit reductive to me. And that bums me out a little bit, but that's also just kind of, it's unsurprising. It's kind of the way it is, right?
I have a different take on.
I would love it. I would love to hear.
Yeah, on these citations, and that's how I think of it. I think of them as citations of yes, the glamour, but also like this. They seem to come up for characters who are trying to put a name or a face to like this joie de vivre, this kind of ecstatic creativity, do what you want, self-determined kind of something that they're looking for. And I think that perception of her, it feels right in some sense.
Yeah.
Given how she looks back on her career. And I've seen it like in what is that Kurosawa film about is it a salesman who's he's kind of bummed out about life? Oh my gosh, I can't. It'll come back to me in a second. But he plays Jay du Amour for like what reason? Unclear. But he played, and it sort of gives him this like breath of fresh air and this renewal and a picture of this other kind of life that he could be living. He's not a salesman, he's an office bureaucrat. This other kind of life that he could be living. But it is interesting as appropriation because it's an appropriation of an appropriation of an appropriation of an appropriation. There's a lot. It's really an infinite kind of mirror situation with her. A cinematic prismatic, you might say.
Exactly.
So someone has asked, Pablo Picasso painted Baker. Ernest Hemingway described her as the most sensational woman anybody ever saw. Who else did she bump elbows with that we might want to hear about?
Well, I saw today on Twitter she had a little fling with Frida Kahlo.
Yeah.
But she, all those like surrealist and painter type guys, your Matisse and stuff. I mean, she was a muse for that group of people. Alexander Calder, who does the wire sculptures. They're kind of very fine mobiles. And the first one that he ever made was the Josephine Baker one. And he was just inspired by her, motion, her being the way that her dance was grounded, but also had a lightness to it. So,
Laura asks, Terry, during your introduction for Princess Tam Tam, you talked a little bit about Baker's authorship as a performer. Can you tell us more about that?
I don't know, Laura. What did I say in the Princess Tam Tam intro? I mean, she, her authorship is, complicated. In terms of film history, the conventional things are, a director, the screenwriter. There's a way to talk about stardom too, but it's interesting with her because um, because they're like four features. There aren't that many films. So I thought about her authorship as an interesting problematic to explore. And I ground it in her presence. So like if she's not doing some of these other authory things, like how do we how do we know it's her? And but I also ask myself, well, why do I need to know that it's her? Like what is it that I want from the idea of Baker being an author? But I'm kind of curious to hear, I don't know if Hanif, if you have a thought on authorship, because I think authorship is so tied to agency. And when people are talking about performers,
Yep.
they kind of go right towards intention and whether they are mocking stereotypes or upending them. And I just kind of decided maybe she doesn't need to be doing any of those
Right.
things.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I am too. Because I do think authorship aligns with agency, and in a way, you're right. It aligns with intention, and I think there's so much about Josephine Baker's intention. There's some that we do know, but I think there's a lot that we don't know, which I actually think is great. You know,
Same.
and exciting in a way to not have access to her modes of intention throughout her career. So I come
Yes.
down on that.
Yeah. Now, that did torment me for a moment there, because I was also trying to establish my authorship
Right.
on someone who had a weird relationship to it. So it was like, well, how do we do this? Like, and I eventually came to what you just said, Hanif, of just like, you know, let there be things that I don't know about. And I think the way that I ended up writing about it was actually made possible by Sadia Hartman's formulation of the might be. There's some way that she talked about women in her this most recent book, The Wayward
Yeah, Wayward
Lives.
Lives and Beautiful Experiments. Yeah.
Yeah, and she has this way that she'll say what might be, and making sense of the unknown and the unrecorded. And I just incorporated that into the whole framework of the book. That I was writing Baker's film history. I was writing what might be her film history, and what might have been if we had done it right the first time, in incorporating, this Black American woman who had performed in France into our idea of Black American cinema and early Black American cinema, and then it just did and de-emphasize the director centric formulation of of the national cinema, and instead just thought about presence, participation, in a more in a broader way, but also a more speculative way.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I
Anything
hope
more?
that's a satisfying answer.
Oh yeah. I think we got time for about two more questions. So just a general one. Someone just wanted to know what's one of the most surprising things you learned about Baker while you were researching her.
My short answer is, I mean, this is researching her years and years and years ago, but her work in the French Resistance. That's it. That's like the one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's. Actually, that the U.S. part of her career was not nothing. That
Right.
it was really significant. that there among the Black press there was enthusiasm and coverage and interest in what she was doing, and they took her seriously.
Did she feel that way at the time? That the American press
She
took her seriously?
Well, her story was always like a rags to riches story, and a Paris made me who I am story, which is fine. That that's fine. That works. I think I would just say, well, I don't know, Josephine. It wasn't
Well,
that.
obviously she knew how to sell herself, and that's one of the things she did very, very well.
She's working. She's doing a job. I'm not trying to take that away from her at all. But so it did surprise me when I just sort of shifted the frame from Paris back to the US, as I was curious, like, well, what did go on before she went there? And does she show up in the press at all? So thank you, ProQuest. Get those historical newspapers. Is it because when I started the project, it took me so long to do this. In the beginning, I don't think those newspapers weren't digitized in the, I don't know, 2000 or whenever it was. I was doing my dissertation, but by the time I was working on the book, those were more readily available, and it made that research more possible.
All right, and a final question. What do you think is something in the modern world that Baker would appreciate compared to the world she lived in?
Ooh, could
The
you say
music
that again?
videos form.
What is something that in the modern world you think Baker would appreciate compared to the world she lived in?
I just said the music video as a form. Absolutely.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been so familiar.
Yeah.
That's so funny because I mean, when you say modern, it kind of made me think, well, she's kind of living in the modern. She helped define it, and so I think there's a lot that would be familiar to her, and that she would be excited. I mean, this is someone who lived in a castle,
Literal castle.
a
Yeah.
literal castle. I feel like she's probably would not be that impressed with a lot of what's going on. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
That's a fun
All right.
question, though. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of a nice, lighthearted, fun one to end things on. And also imagine what Josephine Baker's.
Yeah, imagine her being here. She would have been, what, 115?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People are living that long
Today.
today.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
would have found a way, I'm sure.
You would have found a way, to be sure. To be sure. Yeah. No, it's lovely talking about her. And thank you so much, Hanif. It's good to see you again and to
Always
talk
good
about.
to see you, Dr. Francis. Let's do this next year on her birthday. I'll put it on my calendar.
Yeah. We'll be on a first name basis at that point. Call me Terri.
Will do.
Any
other final comments from either of you?
No, thanks for everyone for hanging out. It's and I hope folks go and watch some of her films, and listen to some of the records if you can get your hands on them.
Yeah. She's a fun, interesting person to think about. I always think about with Black performers. Sometimes we're torn between thinking about the violence that they endured and then thinking about what's like affirming and how to parse that. Mm-hmm. And I think she's one of those people where it's like, you got to get real to get into some Josephine Baker, because you have to think about all the different fantasies. You got to think about this complex relationship she had to authorship and performance, and you kind of got to get with yourself about and be comfortable with this range, her range. You know what I'm saying? Expand to her range, and I think that's all to the good. It's been a great few months thinking about her and reading about her. And thank you so much for your book, Hanif. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Terri and Hanif, for a beautiful conversation and a celebration of the extraordinary Josephine Baker, who I think we have all fallen in love with at this point, and for being sure that her work and this conversation was part of our spring program at IU Cinema. And thank all of you at home for your thoughtful questions. I'd like to thank the entire IU Cinema team, especially Seth, Brittany, David, Elizabeth, and Will, who have all worked behind the scenes to make tonight's event possible. We hope you'll join us next Tuesday for our final event of the season, where our A Place for Film bloggers will join us for a virtual edition of the monthly movie roundup. That will be Tuesday, June 8th at 7 p.m. To all of you tuning in tonight, thank you once again for being with us. Please be well and be kind to yourselves and others during these times, and always. Have a great night.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.